There is a moment in Paul's letter to the Galatians where he stops dictating and takes the pen himself. He says it plainly, "See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand." Scholars have argued for centuries about what those large letters mean. Some think his eyes were failing. Some think he was emphasizing the words the way a man underlines a sentence 3 times when he is afraid he will not be heard. Either way, the image stays with you. An older man, bent over a sheet of papyrus, pressing harder than usual, finishing a letter that has cost him sleep. This is not a calm letter. It is not a polished theological essay. It is the only letter in the entire New Testament where Paul refuses to thank his readers at the opening. Every other church gets a greeting. Every other community gets a paragraph of gratitude before the correction begins. Not Galatia. He skips straight from his name to his anger. "I am astonished," he writes, "that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you." The Greek word he uses for astonished, thaumazo, is the word a man uses when something has happened that should not be possible. Something had gone wrong in Galatia. Something had gone wrong fast. To understand what, you have to understand who these people were before Paul ever reached them. You have to understand the roads he walked, the languages he heard in the markets, and the strange mixture of fear and hope that the gospel found when it crossed into the high plateau of Central Asia Minor. Because the sins that emerged in the Galatian church were not random failures. They grew out of the exact pressures of that place, that century, and that crossing of cultures. Most retellings of this story move quickly past the setting and go straight to the 4 problems. We are going to slow down. We are going to walk into Galatia first, and only then ask why Paul wrote the way he did. Because once you see the world he was writing into, the letter stops sounding like a list of rebukes. It starts sounding like a man fighting for the soul of a community he loves. There is also another question that runs underneath this whole letter. It is the question of whether the gospel can survive translation. Whether what Paul preached in Greek to former pagans in a Roman province could remain the same gospel once a different group of teachers arrived speaking the language of Jerusalem. That question never really went away. It is still the question every generation of the church ends up asking in its own way. So we begin not with the rebuke but with the place. A place most readers of the New Testament have never actually pictured. A region of cold winters and old gods, of warrior memory and Roman milestones, where a former Pharisee once walked into a town and announced that the crucified man from Nazareth was the Lord of the world. Chapter 2. The Celts who became Christians. It surprises most modern readers to learn that the Galatians were Celts. Not metaphorically, literally. The same family of peoples whose cousins built the hill forts of Gaul and the stone circles of the British Isles. Around 278 before Christ, 3 Celtic tribes, the Tolistobogi, the Tectosiges and the Trochmi, crossed the Bosphorus under a chieftain named Leonorius and pushed into the heart of Asia Minor. They came as mercenaries, they stayed as conquerors. The Greeks called them Galatai. The Romans later called the territory Galatia. For 2 centuries, these tribes ruled a high inland plateau from 3 fortified centers: Ancyra, which is modern Ankara, Pessinus, an ancient cult city of the mother goddess, Cybele, and Tavium in the east. They kept their tribal councils, they kept their warrior aristocracy, they kept the long memory of a people who had once stormed Delphi and frightened the Greek world. By the time Paul arrived, more than 300 years had passed. Rome had absorbed them. Greek had become the trading language. But the older identity was still there underneath. A Galatian was not simply a Greek-speaking provincial. A Galatian was the descendant of warriors, raised on stories of independence, now living under the eagle of an empire that taxed him. This matters for one specific reason. The Galatians knew what it felt like to lose an identity. They had already lost one. They had been remade once before, from Celtic chieftains into Roman subjects, from Druidic worshippers into participants in the imperial cult. When Paul came preaching a crucified Jewish Messiah and offering them a place in the family of Abraham, he was offering them a third identity, a new one. And new identities, for people who have already been remade once, are dangerous things. They feel fragile. They feel like they could be taken away again. Then there is the religious landscape. Pessinus was the home of Cybele, the Great Mother. Her priests, the Galli, practiced ritual self-castration in honor of her consort Attis. The mountains of central Anatolia were dotted with rural shrines to Men, the moon god, and to 100 local deities whose names appear only on weathered inscriptions. The mystery cults flourished here. So did the more respectable temples of Zeus and Apollo brought in by Hellenistic settlers. And over all of it, the imperial cult of Rome, with its altars to the emperor and its priests drawn from the local elite. Into this layered world, Paul walked sometime around the late 40s of the 1st century. The book of Acts records that he passed through the region during what we call his second missionary journey, and again later. He himself tells the Galatians that he first preached to them because of a bodily weakness. He does not say what the weakness was. Some have guessed malaria contracted in the lowlands. Some have guessed his eyes again. Whatever it was, it forced him to stop, and in stopping, he preached. The response was extraordinary. He tells them, "You would have torn out your own eyes and given them to me." That is not the language a missionary uses about a polite reception. That is the language of love. The Galatians had welcomed him as if he were an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus himself. They had wept with him. They had taken him in. And then, after he left, the trouble began. There is one more thing to say about the place before we move into the problem. There is an ongoing debate among scholars about which Galatia Paul wrote to. Some, following an older view, think he wrote to the ethnic Galatia in the north, to the descendants of the Celtic tribes around Anshira. Others, following Sir William Ramsay and most modern commentators, think he wrote to the Roman province of Galatia in the south, to the cities of Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra and Derbe that he visited on his first journey. Both views have weight. Both shape how we read the letter. The point for now is simpler. Wherever exactly these believers lived, they lived at a crossroads. 3 cultures pressed on them: Celtic memory, Greek language, Roman power. And then a 4th arrived from Jerusalem, in the form of teachers who said Paul had not told them the whole truth. Chapter 3, the quiet drift into a different gospel. The teachers who came after Paul did not arrive with horns and pitchforks. That is the first thing to understand. Heresy almost never does. They arrived with credentials. They arrived with Jerusalem behind them, or so they said. They arrived speaking warmly of Jesus, agreeing that he was the Messiah, agreeing that he had been crucified and raised. They were not denying the gospel. They were completing it. That is how they framed it. Paul had given the Galatians the beginning. They had come to give them the rest. The Greek word Paul uses for them is not used carelessly. He calls them those who trouble you. The verb is tarasso, and it carries the sense of stirring up muddy water until you cannot see the bottom anymore. That is the precise picture. The Galatians had been able to see clearly when Paul left. After these teachers arrived, the water was clouded. Important things sank out of sight. They could not tell anymore where the gospel ended and where the religious additions began. What were these teachers actually saying? Paul reconstructs their argument piece by piece across the letter, and if you assemble the pieces, you can hear their sermon. It would have gone something like this. Friends, we are glad you have believed in Jesus the Messiah, but you must understand that he is the Jewish Messiah. He is the fulfillment of promises made to Abraham, and those promises were sealed with circumcision. If you want to be true heirs of Abraham, true sons of the covenant, you must enter the covenant the way Abraham did. You must be circumcised. You must keep the festivals. You must observe the law of Moses. Otherwise, you are still, in some real sense, outsiders, half-believers, Christians who have only finished half the journey. It sounds reasonable. That is the danger. It does not sound like a denial of Christ. It sounds like a deepening of commitment, a more serious discipleship. And to people who had spent their whole lives in pagan religious systems where you proved your sincerity by bodily acts, by sacrifices, by initiations, by visible markers, this kind of message would have landed with a familiar weight. Of course, there must be more to do. There always had been. The Galatians had been Galli before, or imperial cultists, or worshippers of Cybele. They knew religion as something that demanded the body. The new teachers were simply offering them a new ritual to perform. Paul saw what they could not see. He saw that this was not a deepening. It was a reversal. He puts it in the sharpest possible terms in chapter 5. If you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you. The Greek is brutal, oudon ophelesai. Christ profits you nothing, not less, nothing. To accept the right as a means of completing your standing with God was to step out from under the cross entirely. There is a phrase Paul uses earlier that is easy to read past. He calls what they are turning to a different gospel and then immediately corrects himself. Not that there is another. The grammar is precise. He uses heteros for different and then denies that there is an allos, another of the same kind. There is no other gospel of the same kind. There are only counterfeits. The teachers were not offering a different version of the same message. They were offering something that wore the language of Jesus over a structure that was not the gospel at all. This is why Paul's tone is so severe. This is why he pronounces a curse, anathema, on anyone who preaches a different message, even an angel from heaven, even Paul himself if he were to change. The curse is not theatrical, it is precise. He is saying that the difference between the gospel and almost the gospel is the difference between life and death. There is no neutral middle ground. A message that adds works to grace as the basis of acceptance is not a slightly weaker gospel. It is the wrong gospel. What the Galatians did not yet understand, and what Paul spends 6 chapters trying to make them understand, is that the addition was the subtraction. Adding the law as a requirement subtracted Christ as the sufficient one. There was no way to keep both. You could not have a Jesus who saved you and a law that justified you. You had to choose which one was holding you up. Chapter 4, the knife and the covenant. To grasp how serious the circumcision controversy was, you have to set aside the modern medicalized way the word lands on contemporary ears. In the first century, circumcision was not a private bodily detail. It was the most visible identity marker in the Mediterranean world. A mark on the body that said, this man belongs to Israel. This man stands inside the covenant of Abraham. This man is a son of the promise. To be circumcised was to be incorporated. To accept circumcision as an adult Gentile was to take a public, irrevocable, lifelong oath that you were now, in your own flesh, a Jew under the law of Moses. This is why Paul calls it a yoke. In the rabbinic literature of the period, taking on circumcision was described as taking on the yoke of the commandments. The image was a working ox. A man who accepted the right agreed to pull the whole load, every commandment, every festival, every ritual purity law, every dietary restriction. Paul makes this completely explicit in chapter 5. Every man who lets himself be circumcised is obligated to keep the whole law. There was no partial covenant. There was no select your favorite commandments option. The yoke came as one piece. The early church had already wrestled with this question once. The council in Jerusalem, recorded in Acts 15, had ruled that Gentiles did not have to be circumcised to be saved. Peter himself had argued against laying on Gentile believers a yoke that, in his words, neither we nor our ancestors have been able to bear. James had concurred. The decision had been written down, sealed with apostolic authority, and sent to the churches. And yet somehow, here in Galatia, the issue was alive again. Teachers were claiming the prestige of Jerusalem, while contradicting Jerusalem's own ruling. They were trading on the name of James, while undermining James's actual decision. Paul knew this because he had been in the room. He had watched the council happen. He had stood with Peter and James and argued the case alongside Barnabas. He had seen the Spirit fall on Cornelius's household before any of them were circumcised. He had seen with his own eyes that God accepted Gentiles by faith, full stop, without the rite. So when these teachers arrived in Galatia and started telling former pagans that they needed to complete their salvation with a knife, Paul did not hear a theological disagreement. He heard a betrayal, and he heard it with the memory of every conversation in Jerusalem ringing in his ears. There is something else worth saying here. Circumcision in the Roman world was not just a religious marker, it was a social one. Romans tended to view it with mockery and disgust. Greek athletic culture, where men exercised naked at the gymnasium, made a circumcised body a target of social ridicule. There were Jewish men in the Hellenistic period who underwent painful surgical procedures to disguise their circumcision so they could compete or conduct business without shame. So when a Gentile in Galatia accepted circumcision, he was not just accepting a covenant sign, he was accepting permanent social risk in a Greco-Roman city, which means the teachers were asking these men to do something costly. And costly things can feel righteous. Costly things can feel like proof. The Galatians may have been drawn to the right precisely because it was hard. because it would prove to themselves and to the watching world that they were serious about God. Paul cuts through all of this with a simple observation. If righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died for nothing. The Greek phrase is dorian apethenon. He died as a gift, gratuitously, with no necessary purpose. That is the conclusion the Galatians were unwittingly drawing every time they considered the knife. If the cross was sufficient, the rite was unnecessary. If the rite was necessary, the cross was insufficient. The two things could not both be true. To choose one was to deny the other. And this is where the letter shifts from rebuke into something almost pastoral. Paul stops arguing for a moment in chapter 4 and pleads with them. "My little children," he says, "with whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you." The Greek word is teknia. It is the most tender word a Greek speaker could use for children. It is the word a mother uses. He is not finished with them. He is in pain over them. He is laboring all over again, as if their faith were a child being born for a second time, because the first birth had been threatened by what came after. Chapter 5. Freedom that learned to bite. While one group in Galatia was running toward the law, another was running the opposite direction, toward freedom, toward the kind of freedom that has stopped meaning anything because it has stopped being shaped by love. Paul addresses this second problem in the same breath he addresses the first, because the two problems were the same problem in different costumes. Both treated the gospel as a means to an end. The legalists used it as a ladder to climb toward God. The libertines used it as a license to climb away from Him. "You were called to freedom, brothers," Paul writes. "Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh." The Greek word for opportunity is a form. It is a military term. It meant the base of operations from which an army launched its raids. Paul is saying that the flesh, the old self-centered nature, was using Christian freedom as a staging ground, as a place to launch its old appetites under a new banner. Grace was being weaponized against the very people grace had set free. What did this look like on the ground? Paul lists the works of the flesh in chapter 5, and the list is uncomfortably specific. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies. The list is not theoretical. Paul does not write it as a generic catalogue. He writes it because these things were happening. Some of them were carryovers from the pagan past. The mystery cults had involved drunkenness and ritual sexual practices. The civic festivals had involved feasting that easily slid into excess. Some of the new believers were apparently telling themselves that Christ had freed them from law and therefore from all restraint. There is a theological term for this drift: antinomianism, against law. The instinct that since salvation is by grace alone, behavior does not finally matter. Paul had heard this objection his whole ministry. In Romans, he poses it directly. Shall we sin that grace may abound? His answer there is short and total. Mi genoito, may it never be, not a chance. Out of the question. The same impulse was now showing up in Galatia, dressed in slightly different clothes. The Galatian libertines were not consciously rebelling. Many of them probably believed they were exercising their new spiritual liberty. They had been told they were free, and they were taking the word at its widest possible definition. Paul's response to them is not another rule. That is the striking thing. He does not respond to libertinism by reintroducing the law that the legalists were trying to add back. He responds with a different way of life altogether. Walk by the Spirit, he says, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. The verb is peripatio. It means to walk around, to go about your daily business. He is not describing a religious moment. He is describing the ordinary motion of a life. The cure for misused freedom was not stricter laws. It was a different companion. The Spirit Himself, walking with the believer through the marketplace, through the home, through the conflict, through the temptation. And then Paul does something beautiful. Instead of giving them another list of prohibitions, he gives them a description of fruit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The Greek word for fruit is singular, karpos, not fruits plural, one fruit with 9 flavors. He is saying that these qualities grow together, organically, from a single source. You cannot pluck love off the tree without also growing patience. You cannot harvest joy without also harvesting self-control. Against such things, he adds dryly, there is no law. The law has nothing to say against a person who actually lives this way. Such a person has already fulfilled what the law was reaching for. But the libertinism had a darker side that Paul names directly. The Galatian believers were biting and devouring one another. The verbs are dakno and katestheo, the language of wild animals tearing at flesh. Paul says, watch out or you will consume one another. He is not exaggerating for effect. Communities that confuse freedom with self-indulgence always end up at each other's throats, because freedom without love has no internal limit. Each person is doing what feels right to him, and the costs land on everyone else until trust collapses. This is one of the quiet tragedies of the Galatian situation. The two groups, the legalists and the libertines, almost certainly hated each other. The strict ones looked down on the loose ones as scandals to the faith. The loose ones looked down on the strict ones as joyless slaves. And both groups were equally far from the gospel Paul had preached. Both had taken Christ and turned him into raw material for a different project. One project was self-righteousness, the other was self-indulgence, and underneath both was the same root, self. Chapter 6, the apostle who had to defend his own name. There is a strange feature of Galatians that you do not find in any other Pauline letter. Paul spends the first 2 chapters defending himself, not the gospel, not directly, himself, his credentials, his call, his relationship with the Jerusalem leaders. He tells the story of his conversion, his time in Arabia, his first visit to Peter, his 14-year absence from Jerusalem, his eventual confrontation with Peter at Antioch. The whole autobiography, compressed and urgent. Why? Because the teachers in Galatia had attacked him personally. They had told the Galatians that Paul was a second-tier apostle, that he had received his gospel from men, not from God, that his independence from Jerusalem was not a sign of authenticity, but a sign of irregularity, that the real apostles, the original 12, the ones who had walked with Jesus in Galilee, taught a fuller and more demanding message. It was a clever attack. It did not require them to refute Paul's theology. It only required them to undermine his standing. If Paul was a freelance teacher whose authority was uncertain, then anything in his letters could be questioned. The Galatians could keep the parts of his teaching they liked and discard the parts the new teachers were trying to overwrite. And so Paul, who in other letters seems almost reluctant to talk about himself, has to here. He has no choice. The integrity of the gospel was now bound up with the integrity of his calling. Notice the very first sentence of the letter. Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father. 2 prepositions, from and through, apo and dia. He is being precise. He is not denying that human hands had ever rested on him in commissioning. He is denying that human hands were the source or the channel of his apostolic authority. The source was Jesus Christ. The channel was Jesus Christ. Everything else was secondary. Even the moment in Antioch when prophets and teachers laid hands on him and Barnabas and sent them out. That was a recognition, not an installation. The installation had happened on the road to Damascus, when the risen Christ knocked him to the ground and called him by name. This brings us to a question scholars have asked for a long time. Was Paul really an apostle in the same sense as the 12? Some have argued no. They have pointed out that the 11, after Judas, chose Matthias to fill the vacant place. Acts records the casting of lots. 2 candidates were proposed. The lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11. From that moment on, Matthias disappears. He is never mentioned again. No epistles, no missionary journeys, no record of his ministry. Paul, by contrast, becomes the most prolific writer in the New Testament, and the apostle who carries the gospel to the edge of the empire. Some early commentators speculated that the choice of Matthias was made too early, before Pentecost on human initiative, and that the Spirit chose Paul instead. That is a minority reading. Other scholars argue that both Matthias and Paul were genuine apostles, just with very different missions. The text itself does not settle the question. What the text does settle is that Paul considered himself an apostle on equal footing with Peter and James, and that he was willing to defend that footing publicly, even to the point of correcting Peter face to face when Peter's behavior contradicted the gospel. That confrontation, recorded in chapter 2 of Galatians, is one of the most striking moments in the New Testament. Peter had come to Antioch and had been eating freely with Gentile believers. Then certain men came from James, and Peter pulled back. He stopped eating with the Gentiles. He withdrew. And Barnabas, Paul's longtime friend and partner, was carried along by the same fear. Paul's for Peter's behavior is hypocrisy, acting under a mask. Peter knew better. He had been the one to baptize Cornelius. He had been the one to defend Gentile inclusion at the Jerusalem Council. And now, under social pressure from a Jewish Christian faction, he was eating in a way that suggested Gentiles were second class. Paul opposed him to his face, he says, because he stood condemned. The verb is enantian antistemi, to stand against. That is what Paul did. He confronted the most prominent leader in the early church in front of the whole Antioch community because the gospel was at stake. And here is what makes the story so important for the Galatian situation. The same kind of pressure that had warped Peter's behavior in Antioch was now warping the Galatians' theology. The same anxiety about being acceptable to a stricter faction was driving them towards circumcision. If Paul had been willing to face down Peter himself for that drift, he was certainly not going to soften his words to a group of Galatian congregations who had not yet gone as far as Peter had. What does it mean that Paul received his gospel by revelation? He says it twice. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. The Greek word is apocalypsis, unveiling, the same word that gives the last book of the Bible its name. He is making a startling claim, that the gospel he preached was not pieced together from conversations with eyewitnesses. It came directly. The same Jesus who appeared to Peter on Easter morning appeared to Paul outside Damascus and taught him personally. Some of that teaching may have been compressed into the moment of vision. Some of it may have unfolded across the years he spent in Arabia, away from the Jerusalem church, learning. The text does not say exactly. What it does say is that when Paul finally came up to Jerusalem, 3 years later to spend 15 days with Peter, he came as someone who already knew, not as a student, as a colleague checking his understanding against another man's memory of the same Lord. This was the credential the Galatian teachers were trying to dismiss. And this was the credential Paul refused to surrender. Because if his apostleship was second-hand, his gospel was second-hand. And if his gospel was second-hand, the Galatians had every reason to listen to other voices that claimed a more direct line to Jerusalem. So he spends 2 chapters anchoring his authority in the bedrock of personal encounter. I saw him. He sent me. The gospel I gave you came from his own mouth. There is nothing to add to it. Chapter 7. What Galatia still asks of us, the letter ends with a strange and moving line. Paul takes the pen from his scribe one last time and writes, in those large letters of his, a kind of final summary. May it never be that I would boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation, and then a benediction, peace and mercy upon all who walk by this rule, and upon the Israel of God. From now on let no one cause me trouble, for I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. The marks, the Greek word is stigmata. In the Roman world, slaves and soldiers were marked. Slaves were branded with the sign of their owner. Soldiers were tattooed with the name of their general. Religious devotees of certain cults bore marks of their patron deity. Paul is saying, you want to talk about marks on the body? You want to debate which marks count? Look at me. I have been beaten in 5 different cities. I have been stoned at Lystra and left for dead. I carry scars from 100 road miles and a dozen prisons. These are the marks of Jesus on my flesh. These are the only marks that matter. Compared to these, the question of whether a man is circumcised becomes almost embarrassing. The whole letter has been moving toward this moment. Paul has not been arguing about a ritual. He has been arguing about ownership. Whose marks do you bear? Whose name is written on your body? The legalists wanted to write Moses on the Galatians. The libertines wanted to write nothing at all and call it freedom. Paul wanted them to bear the marks of Jesus, the marks of a life poured out for others, the marks of love that suffered, the marks of a freedom that learned how to serve. This is the heart of the letter, and it is what makes Galatians so much more than a doctrinal corrective. It is a meditation on identity, on where the human self finally belongs. The Galatians had been Celts, then Hellenists, then Roman provincials, then Christians. Identity had been added and stripped from them across the centuries, and in their new faith, they were trying once again to figure out what kind of people they now were. The legalist teachers offered them a clear answer. You are sons of Abraham, marked in your flesh, keeping the calendar of Israel, eating the foods of the covenant. The libertine impulse offered them a different answer. You are free. You are above all the old categories. Live as you please. Paul offered them a third answer that absorbed both and transcended both. You are a new creation, Cain Tisses, something the world has never seen before. Not a Gentile becoming a Jew, not a Jew abandoning his heritage. A new kind of human being made by the Spirit, bearing the marks of Jesus, walking in love. This is also where the letter still speaks. The pressures Paul named have not gone away. They have changed costumes, but they remain. There is still a religious instinct that wants to add, that wants to attach a list of requirements to the gospel and call the additions seriousness. That feels suspicious of grace because grace seems too easy. There is still a counter instinct that wants to subtract, that wants to take the freedom of the gospel and remove every shape from it, until the word grace means nothing more than do as you please. Both instincts are old. Both wear new clothes in every century. The legalist might no longer demand circumcision, but he might demand a particular political commitment, a particular cultural marker, a particular spiritual experience, before he believes another believer is real. The libertine might no longer participate in pagan festivals, but he might insist that the gospel makes no demand on his appetites or his speech or his use of money. Galatians answers both by sending the reader back to the cross. Paul does not give the Galatians a balanced middle ground between law and license. He gives them a person, the crucified and risen Jesus, in whom there is no condemnation and from whom there flows a life that walks in love. The cross humbles the legalist, because at the cross there is nothing the believer can add. The cross also disciplines the libertine, because at the cross there is nothing the believer would want to add to a love so costly. The same event undoes both errors at once. There is a question worth sitting with as this letter closes. If a teacher arrived in your community tomorrow, claiming the prestige of an older authority, gently suggesting that what you had been taught was incomplete, offering you a clearer set of markers to prove your seriousness to God, would you recognize the voice? Would you remember Galatia? Paul wrote this letter with his trembling hand and his large letters, so that someone 2,000 years later, someone who had never seen a Celtic warrior or a Roman milestone or the temple of Cybele at Pessinus might be able to recognize the same drift when it appeared again. That is the gift of an old letter written under pressure. It teaches the eye to see. If this kind of careful biblical storytelling matters to you, your reflections in the comments help shape what comes next. And there is more like this coming on the channel. The Galatian church survived. We know this because their letter survived. Someone in those small congregations preserved it, copied it, passed it on until it reached us. Which means somewhere in Ancyra or Pisidian Antioch or one of those cities whose names we now know only from inscriptions, the warning landed. The drift was reversed, the gospel held, and the marks that mattered were the ones Paul carried into his last imprisonment in Rome, and finally to a roadside execution outside the city, where a Roman sword finished what a Damascus road had begun. The four sins of Galatia were never only Galatian: the libertinism, the legalism, the biting and devouring, the rejection of the apostolic word. They are the four old temptations of every congregation that ever tried to follow the crucified Jesus. Paul's letter does not flatter us by pretending we have outgrown them. It honors us by assuming we can still hear. It still asks the Galatian question of every reader who picks it up. Whose marks do you bear, and whose gospel do you trust? And what kind of new creation are you becoming? That is where the letter rests. That is where perhaps we should rest with it.